Using the power of the internet, you can now watch GLC on any TV in the US, Canada, the UK, and Ireland with Roku. Basically, a box that connects to your television. Roku acts as a middleman between your internet connection and your television. So if you have internet service at your home, chances are high that you can watch all of the great GLC programming. And best of all, it's highly affordable too, with only a one-time fee ranging from $50 to $100. Log on to our website, www.glc.us.com, for details on how you can watch GLC via Roku.
Well, welcome to the Wednesday edition of Update News. I'm Amy Cooper here with
Dr. Rick Wadgen. It's good to be here with you, Amy.
It's good to be here with you, Rick. Well, you know, we had said Monday that our bookstore manager, Jenny, had an emergency.
Yes.
And, well, she wasn't in yesterday either. And today she's in, and she had 51 phone messages when she got there. And a lot of people going, why haven't you called me back yet? Mm-hmm. Jenny was in a really bad car wreck on her way to work Monday, and we are praising God that she walked away from it clean. She could have easily died in that wreck.
Yeah,
it happened on Highway 80 out here.
Yeah, it was bad. But she's okay. People love Jenny. They call up just to talk to her. They come in just to see her. So we know you miss her. We missed her for 2 days, but she's back. Give her a little bit of slack as she returns your calls. So.
Yeah, because she's got catch-up work to do now.
She does. Yeah.
And mustard. But that's
Hot
it.
dog.
Hot dog. That's it on the announcements, really. But we have a couple of really great letters, and I think I get to read the first one, right?
Okay, great.
Dear Al, Amy, Rick, and Tommy, my wife and I have been watching GLC for quite some time now, and I feel ashamed for taking so long to become a partner. I guess with all that's going on in Israel, I finally realized that we must stand with you. Manuel and Margaret from Lubbock, Texas. Well, welcome aboard. We are thrilled that you've joined us. You know, that's actually there's Manuel who wrote the letter. Manuel, that's actually something that Rick and I have been talking about. As everybody kind of knows, Mom had surgery a couple of weeks ago, so they're out for a while. And this program, just gathering the news, is quite the task. But there's so much going on in Israel. What was really, really funny is that the ceasefire went into effect the day of her surgery, and they just came out of it yesterday afternoon.
There's so much vital news going on around the world right now. I mean, vital. As I read some of the articles today, getting ready for this, pretty scary stuff. But we need to be aware. We need to know what's going on and pray.
Man, I didn't have time to get half of it.
But it leads me also to the point of that's why we need user support, our viewers.
Our viewers,
yes,
yeah.
To support GLC so that we can keep bringing this kind of news and the programs.
That's right, because we are viewer supported. So anyway, we really, really thank you for partnering with us, and we appreciate you. We can't do what we do without you, and that's all there is to it.
It's true. And we have another letter as well. It says, Dear Al, Tommy, Amy, and staff, thank you for the book. That's Mr. Cooper's book. There is so much anti-Semitism against Israel, but Israel is the apple of God's eye. He will take care of Israel when all the nations go against him. And that's true. That's scripture. God is going to fight for them. That's Ezekiel 38. And if the U.S. is one of those nations, then God will destroy this nation too. Sad to say, but I agree. Thank you so much for the book. It was very informative. Yolanda from Las Cruces, New Mexico.
That book was sent out to people who gave, and I don't want to get it wrong, but it was the first part of this year.
Yes, that's correct.
And if you didn't get a copy of the book, you can get one from the bookstore. They're $5.95. Right. Is that right?
I believe that's true. Yeah, I think they are $5.95. Yeah.
I still haven't had time to read that book.
I read it a couple times when we were getting ready to publish it. It's good. It's very good. Okay, well, Amy, we have a video from Lars Anderson, so we want to go right to that, and we'll come right back with some more news.
Shalom, I'm Lars Enarsson with the Watchman International, continuing to report on the situation in Israel. Today it is Wednesday, August 20, and as was expected, Hamas broke another extended ceasefire yesterday, continuing to shoot missiles and rockets into Israel. And Israel has retaliated with aerial bombardments and also have called up reserves to prepare for the possibility of another ground operation into Gaza. I want to thank those of you who have written to us and expressed appreciation for these video updates, and we will keep you informed in order to help you to pray for the situation. As watchmen on the walls of Jerusalem, we are called to pray as Yeshua, Jesus, taught us to pray. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. We are called to pray for God's will to happen. And in order to do that, we need, first of all, to study the scriptures carefully where God has expressed his will that we are to pray. Secondly, we are to watch in prayer, to hear from him by the Holy Spirit how he wants us to specifically pray. Last week on August 13, God woke me up at 3 a.m. in the morning, and I believe he gave me directions for how he specifically wants us to pray for the situation right now in Israel. Number one, he wants us to pray that Israel will not enter into any agreement with Hamas. They should not agree to any of the demands that Hamas is making right now in the negotiations. But secondly, Israel must go into Gaza again to topple Hamas. And in order to do that, thirdly, we need to pray that the Israeli army will create free zones in Gaza where the civilian population will find shelter and food and water and be protected from the war. Actually, this is the UN's responsibility. However, they are working together with Hamas to a large extent, and they place civilians in shelter close to the war zone, which endangers them and cause an unnecessary civilian casualties in Gaza. So we need to pray that Israel will create these free zones that will give them also greater liberty to hit the terrorists in Gaza. Finally, we are to pray that the gospel will be able to reach into Gaza, into these free zones, to see a beginning of the highway of revival that I call it, expressed in Isaiah chapter 19, from Egypt to Assyria, where the Arabs and the Jews eventually will worship the Lord together as a blessing for the entire world. And so this is the grand goal that we need to pray towards in Gaza. In order for this to happen, the Islamists must be defeated in Gaza. And I believe that we are to pray that Israel will enter into Gaza to do that at this time. Now we have to remember that from the outset of Operation Protective Edge over a month ago, the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu has been clearly very reluctant to go into Gaza to topple Hamas. What the reason is for that, we do not know. But as I said in the beginning of this update, we are to pray that God's will be done. And that is our responsibility as watchmen on the walls of Jerusalem. So please continue to pray for these specific prayer points. Actually, a majority of the population in Israel, according to recent polls, are asking that the Israeli army will go all the way in Gaza to defeat Hamas at this time. Close to 60% in a recent poll. And also several of the ministers, Knesset members, both from the left even and on the right, are asking that Netanyahu will go all the way and make sure that Hamas is defeated this time. So, friends, let's really agree together in prayer for God's will to be done, even though it might look impossible. And I thank you for standing with us. Please go to our website, thewatchman.org, and subscribe to the prayer alerts that you can follow also the specific prayer points and the scriptures that we give you as a foundation for prayer. I'm Lars Enarsson with the Watchman International. God bless you. Shalom.
A free zone. That would be a pretty cool thing.
Yes, that's a biblical concept, isn't it? Cities of refuge.
Well,
Yeah.
it is, but in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
Well, our first article comes from Israel National News. Senior Hamas leader Mohammed Deif may have been killed in airstrikes, according to Fox News, despite Israeli silence and Hamas's denial of Deif's death. Israeli intelligence officials told the news outlet that Deif, who is the head of Hamas's military wing, the Al-Qassam Brigades, was killed during IAF strikes on Wednesday. Hamas continues to deny this, however, and spokesman Sami Abu Zuri has said that Deif is still alive and well and threatened retaliation for the assassination attempt. AFP reported that Hamas leader Musa Abu Marzouk said the airstrike killed Deif's wife and child. Local health officials, quoted by Reuters, said 3 people were killed in a strike on a house in Gaza City, including a child and a woman. The 3rd victim was not identified.
Well, Deif, 49, has eluded 4 assassination attempts. However, during the last attempt, he suffered serious injuries and is now severely handicapped, leading some to suspect that he may not have escaped an airstrike. Deif is responsible for suicide bombings during the 90s and several abductions of IDF soldiers. He's considered the official who determines the agenda of the Izz ad-Din al-Qassam brigades and is regarded as the brain behind Hamas. He was heavily involved in the recent upgrade of Hamas's rocket arsenal. From his hiding place inside Gaza, Deif recently declared that the only way to reach a ceasefire in Gaza is for Israel to end its siege on the coastal territory. He stated, "The firing will stop only if the Israeli aggression ends and only if the blockade is lifted. The Zionist entity will not enjoy security if our people cannot live in freedom and dignity." Israeli officials have remained silent on Deif's status, but have admitted that he was the target of the Wednesday morning strike.
How about that? The next article comes to us from the AFP, NBC, the New York Times, and then another article from the AFP. Well, 2 women are being tested for the Ebola virus in New Mexico and California. The New Mexico woman, age 30, recently returned from teaching in Sierra Leone. She had no known contact with the disease, but was placed in isolation at the University of New Mexico Hospital, that's Albuquerque, after she experienced indications of the virus. KTLA TV in Los Angeles reported that the California patient, who may have been exposed to the virus, is at Kaiser, Permanente South Sacramento Medical Center in Sacramento.
Yeah.
No details were given about that patient, the circumstances of the potential contact, or any symptoms. Health officials said that the blood work from both females was sent to the CDC in Atlanta for testing. Results are expected by the week's end. Hospitals have been on high alert, and the CDC says it has fielded nearly 70 reports of suspected infections from 29 states. Of 6 people tested, all have been negative.
On the continent of Africa, health officials revealed to the AFP that the Ebola outbreak need never have spread from Guinea to Sierra Leone, except for a herbalist in the remote eastern border village of Sakoma. Well, the top medical official in the hard-hit district of Kanema told AFP she was claiming to have powers to heal Ebola. Cases from Guinea were crossing into Sierra Leone for treatment. The herbalist herself became infected and died. Her mourners fanned out across the rolling hills of the Kisii tribal chiefdoms, starting a chain reaction of infections, deaths, funerals, and more infections.
A worrying outbreak in Sierra Leone turned into a major epidemic on June 17th when the virus finally hit Kanema, a city of 190,000. 12 nurses have been among the 277 people who've since died. 10 others have been infected, but they survived. The first case at the Kanema hospital was a woman who had partially miscarried, having probably passed the virus to her unborn child. The hospital quickly set up a makeshift Ebola unit. It was then that the nurses began dying, prompting a strike of 100 nurses who complained of poor management of the Ebola Center. Shifts are voluntary, and many nurses have refused to work in the unit, while those who remained are overworked and exhausted. There are 80 beds in the Ebola unit, almost double its capacity. 12-hour shifts are par for the course. Some staff members say they've gone weeks without a day off.
Well, the virus is highly infectious through exposure to bodily fluids. Its rapid spread in West Africa has been attributed in part to relatives touching victims during traditional funeral rites. It attacks almost every section of tissue, reducing organs and flesh in the most aggressive infections to a pudding-like mush, which leaches or erupts from the body. Days before they die, the tropical pathogen can turn people into de facto corpses with little higher brain function and negligible motor control. The global death toll from Ebola stands at 1,229, with the bulk of cases in Liberia, Guinea, and Sierra Leone. In Sierra Leone, the virus has infected 849 people and claimed 365 lives since the herbalist began inviting clients across the borders with promises of salvation.
And in Liberia, a desperate search is on for 17 Ebola patients who fled an attack on a quarantine center in the capital, Monrovia, as the outbreak appeared to overwhelm authorities in West Africa's worst-hit nation. Club-wielding youths raided a medical facility set up in a high school in the densely populated Monrovia slum on Saturday, some shouting, "There's no Ebola," echoing wild rumors that the epidemic had been made up by the West. That's us. The head of the Health Workers Association of Liberia, George Williams, said of the 29 patients in the raided unit, all had tested positive for Ebola and were receiving preliminary treatment before being taken to a hospital.
Well, searches of the teeming West Point slum have so far failed to turn up any of the missing victims, as neighboring Guinea said a wave of sick Liberians had begun crossing the border, which it had officially closed 10 days ago. Officials are considering sealing off the area, by the way, home to 75,000 people, to stop the nightmare scenario of people with the highly contagious disease wandering the city where unburied corpses have lain abandoned in the streets.
Oh, my goodness.
It sounds like a movie of the apocalypse from the future or something, but it's true. It's happening right now.
Okay. Reuters and the AP are telling us that the Islamic State insurgents released a video on websites Tuesday showing the beheading of U.S. journalist James Foley and images of another U.S. journalist whose life the militants said depended on U.S. action in Iraq. The video titled "A Message to America" was posted on social media websites. Its authenticity has been verified by U.S. officials. Foley, a 40-year-old journalist from Rochester, New Hampshire, was kidnapped on November 22, 2012, in northern Syria while freelancing for Agence France-Presse, the AFP, and the Global Post. The car he was riding in was stopped by 4 militants in a contested battle zone that both Sunni rebel fighters and government forces were trying to control. And right there, I want to point out that the IS, they are Sunni. So that's who got him at that time. He's not been heard from since, until the video. Steven Sotloff, who appeared at the end of the video, was kidnapped near the Syrian-Turkish border in August 2013. He has worked in Syria, Libya, and Yemen as a freelance journalist with published stories in Time magazine and Foreign Policy.
The video begins with scenes of President Barack Obama explaining his decision to order airstrikes. It then cuts to a bald man in an orange jumpsuit kneeling in the desert, next to a black-clad militant with a knife to his throat. Foley's name appears in both English and Arabic graphics on the screen, and he's wearing a clip-on microphone as he begins his statement. Next, the man in the mask speaks in a British accent, saying, "This is James Wright Foley, an American citizen of your country. As a government, you have been at the forefront of the aggression towards the Islamic State. Today, your military air force is attacking us daily in Iraq. Your strikes have caused casualties amongst Muslims. You are no longer fighting an insurgency. We are an Islamic army and a state that has been accepted by a large number of Muslims worldwide."
I hope you didn't miss that British accent. That means he is a foreign fighter. Following his statement, the masked man is shown beginning to cut at the neck of the captain. The video fades to black before the beheading is completed. The next shot appears to show the captive lying dead on the ground, his head on his body, not attached correctly. At the end of the video, a militant shows a second man who was identified as American journalist Steven Sotloff. The masked man says, "The life of this American citizen, Obama, depends on your next decision."
Islamic State released another video on Tuesday that gave the strongest indication yet that it might attempt to strike American targets. The video with the theme "Breaking of the American Cross" boasts Islamic State will emerge victorious over Crusader America. The latest footage spoke of a holy war between Islamic State and the United States, which occupied Iraq for nearly a decade and faced stiff resistance from al-Qaeda. Unlike al-Qaeda, Islamic State is so far focused on territorial gains designed to eventually establish a full-blown Islamic empire.
Islamic State, a Sunni militant group, had not previously executed American citizens publicly. The group is the heir apparent of the militancy known as al-Qaeda in Iraq, which beheaded many of its victims, including American businessman Nicholas Berg in 2004. The IS militant group is so ruthless in its attacks against all people they consider heretics or infidels that it has been disowned by al-Qaeda's leaders. In seeking to impose its harsh interpretation of Islamic law in the lands it's trying to control, the extremists have slain soldiers and civilians alike in horrifying executions, including mounting the decapitated heads on some of its victims on spikes.
Several senior U.S. officials were directed with knowledge of the situation said the Islamic State very recently threatened to kill Foley to avenge the crushing airstrikes over the last 2 weeks against militants advancing on Mount Sinjar, the Mosul Dam, and the Kurdish capital of Erbil.
So they actually threatened that they were going to do that.
Yes. Wow.
Wow is right. Okay, another article from Israel National News. This one comes from the Sinai Peninsula. 4 decapitated bodies were found north of the Sinai Peninsula Wednesday morning, about 15 kilometers from the border with Gaza. Residents of Sheikh Zayed found the bodies. Security forces in Cairo estimated that the deceased were kidnapped from the Egyptian capital on Monday morning. A security source told the Al-Masri Al-Yom Daily that the organization responsible for the murders is trying to imitate the execution methods of the Islamic State Sunni militant group. According to one police prediction, the 4, who were last seen in a car, were kidnapped by a local terrorist organization on suspicion of giving over information to Egyptian police and military forces.
Terror is rampant throughout the Sinai, an ever-increasing problem for Egypt since the 2011 ouster of Hosni Mubarak. Well, most of the terrorist attacks have been claimed by the al-Qaeda-inspired group Ansar Beit al-Maqdis, since the military ousted former Islamist president Mohammed Morsi. Well, among the attacks claimed by the group was the assassination of a top Egyptian police general, gunned down as he left his home in a West Cairo neighborhood, and a bombing on a tour bus filled with South Korean tourists in the Sinai. Meanwhile, IS terrorism has been linked to similar copycats in Gaza. Several reports have surfaced that the group's flags are flying in the region and that it has been behind rockets fired on Israel.
Very interesting. And now from The Guardian and Israel National News, speaking to reporters on his return to the Vatican from South Korea, Pope Francis stated that he believes he has a maximum of 3 years left to live and indicated that he's considering early retirement. Benedict XVI opened the door, Francis said, mentioning his predecessor, who resigned unexpectedly due to his unstable health condition. Popes don't resign.
Right.
According to reporters on the plane, the Pope was generally in high spirits despite the grim prediction.
Francis, 77, was elected in March of last year. He's not been in the best of health throughout his life. He lost one of his lungs in his 20s after a serious illness and has undergone several surgeries in recent years. Although Vatican officials have hinted in the past that Francis may also have trouble walking, this was the first time that Francis spoke publicly about his medical condition. Francis admitted he had some nerve problems which required treatment. He added, "One of these neuroses is that I'm too much of a homebody," recalling that the last time he had taken a holiday outside his native Argentina was with the Jesuit community in 1975.
Got a good sense of humor, I guess. When asked about his global popularity, which was evident again during his 5-day visit to South Korea, the Argentinian Pope said he could handle the popularity more naturally these days, though at first it scared me a little. The pontiff has proposed a number of revolutionary ideas to reform the church, including a zero-tolerance policy toward sex abuse in the Catholic Church and urging the Vatican to embrace the poor, both of which have most certainly contributed to his popularity.
However, his tenure as Pope has been marked by a controversial visit to Israel earlier this year, when he referred to the Palestinian Authority, the PA, as the State of Palestine, and then made an unexpected stop at the security barrier between Jerusalem and Bethlehem to pray, instead of at the Western Wall in Jerusalem.
Keep praying for the Pope. That's all I can say. Well, Israel National News also tells us that on Sunday night, the IDF demolished the homes of the 3 terrorists involved in the kidnapping and murder of 3 Israeli teens, Gilad Sha'ar, Naftali Frankel, and Eyal Yafrah. According to a statement by the IDF spokesperson's unit, the homes of terrorists Hussam Kaswami and Ammar Abu Aisheh were demolished. The home of the 3rd terrorist, Marwan Kaswami, was sealed. The IDF statement continued, "Demolishing the homes of the terrorists sends a serious and deterring message to terrorists and their accomplices that there is a price to pay if they choose to continue their terrorist activities and attacks on innocent people." Hussam Kaswami, a resident of Hebron, was recently arrested in the Arab neighborhood of Shafat in Jerusalem. He admitted under interrogation to having orchestrated the kidnapping and said he received funding from Hamas officials in Gaza. The other 2 terrorists, pictured on the screen, are still at large. The 3 Israeli teenagers went missing on June 12th and were declared kidnapped the next day. Suspicion immediately fell on Hamas after intelligence pointed toward the involvement of Kaswama and Abu Aisheh, whose names were publicized 2 weeks later. An 18-day search for the 3 teenagers ensued, accompanied by a crackdown on Hamas in Judea and Samaria. The search ended in tragedy after their bodies were found in a field close to an Arab village near Hebron. They were buried side by side in the city of Moadin. The 3 boys are believed to have been murdered very shortly after being kidnapped. One source close to the murder investigation said a recording of a call made by one of the boys as he was being kidnapped provided crucial evidence that the murder had been pre-planned from the very start.
Wow. And this last article comes to us from Israel National News as well. As Gaza terrorists breached the ceasefire and renewed their rocket fire on Israeli civilian centers on Tuesday, Arab terrorists in the Israeli capital of Jerusalem apparently didn't want to be left out of the action. In eastern Jerusalem, 2 firebombs were hurled at a public egged bus. One of the Molotov cocktails exploded on impact, setting the bus on fire. No injuries were reported, however. The bus was damaged in the attack. Police are searching for the terrorists.
Another attack occurred shortly thereafter in the Arab-majority Shiloach neighborhood located just southeast of the Old City. The area is known by Arabs as Silwan, and tourists remember it because of its proximity to the city of David. Here, 2 Molotov cocktails were thrown at a Jewish home. They burst into flames and set the roof on fire. Firefighting crews arrived quickly to fight the blaze, while police forces started searching for the perpetrators. Well, we love you a lot. Thank you for standing with us. See you on Friday.